denizens of the night. Welcome to another episode of the macabre, the terrifying. Tonight, we'll take up serpents. Well, no, not really. But we'll wind up in a place where they just might. Our protagonist is a young man who loses his father too soon. He doesn't have much to remember his old man by, just a handful of paintings his father did earlier in life. But one day, he discovers something that will change the course of his life and bring him face to face with a monster. This story is called My Father Spent 30 Years Running from a Small Town Church. I Just Found Out Why, and was written by Spooky Rider 71. My father was a hard-working man. He worked 10 or 12-hour days, 6 days a week. We barely talked. Some days I'd find him passed out on the living room couch or at the kitchen table with a beer, eyes on the newspaper, but not really seeing it. His eyes would be sad and distant, face flushed. A couple beers in, he'd get like this. He wasn't drunk, just tipsy. I wasn't neglected, not by any means. But I was never front and center in his mind, or at least that's what it felt like. That's just the kind of dad he was. But then he died. We buried him the summer I turned 16. He fell asleep at the wheel and went into a ditch on his drive home from work. Mom was, of course, devastated. We had a whole storage unit of bits and pieces of his life, a storage unit that we couldn't afford anymore. Mom drove me out there one afternoon, a few weeks after the funeral. The stuff she wanted to save went into the trunk. Boxes and boxes of stuff. We went through everything. The air was thick with dust motes. He painted in college. My father, who would sit with a 1,000-yard stare at the dinner table after a brutal day at work, had been a pretty good artist back then. There were a couple of landscapes, a few portraits of people I didn't recognize and that my mom said were distant relatives, and half a dozen paintings of the same building. A little black church. It was squat, square, and plain, an unassuming building. The kind of tiny country church that could fit no more than a couple of dozen people. I knew my father was from the boonies, way out in the country. "Mom, where is this church?" I asked, tilting the painting up. She glanced over and squinted at the painting. "That's from when your dad was a kid. A church near where he grew up. He went there?" "I guess so. He painted it enough." She turned back to the box she was sorting through. "Your father didn't really talk about his childhood. I met him in college. He'd already left all that behind by then. He wasn't close to his family." I stared at the painting. Just a small, dark building in the middle of nowhere. We went to my mom's folks every year. I'd never met my dad's family. They had barely showed up at his funeral. "That's what makes all these paintings so strange." She paused, wiping the sweat from her forehead. "He must have done them early in college before we met. After that, he never painted churches again, just landscapes, pretty sunsets, normal stuff." "You ever ask him about it?" "A few times." She stood there quietly, staring at nothing. "He just changed the subject. He was good at that." He was excellent at that. I couldn't throw them away. Someday they'd end up in someone else's trash pile, forgotten, but not yet. I hung them in my bedroom, all 6 paintings, arranged on the wall above my desk, where I'd see them while doing homework. Mom came in one night, stood in the doorway looking at them. She didn't say anything for a long time. "You really want those up?" she finally asked. Yeah. She nodded and left. We didn't talk about them again. 2 years passed. The paintings stayed on my wall. I graduated, applied to colleges, got accepted. Mom wrapped each one in newspaper when I packed. Everything I owned went into the back of her car. She drove me 3 hours north and helped me carry the boxes up 4 flights of stairs to my dorm room. Mom hugged me at the door. Call me on Sundays. I will. She looked at me for a second, then left. I unpacked the paintings last, hung them on the wall above my desk in 2 rows of 3. I called my mom most Sundays. How's school? She asked one Sunday in my junior year. Good. I'm graduating in May. Your father would be proud. She always said that. I never knew if it was true. Hey, something weird happened last week, she said. Some of your dad's family showed up at the house. What? Who? I don't know. A man and a woman. They said they were his cousins. Wanted to go through his things, see if there was anything they could have. After all these years. What did you tell them? I told them to leave. It felt wrong, Charlie. They weren't at the funeral. They never called, never sent a card. Now they want his stuff? I stared at the paintings on my wall. Did they say what they were looking for? No, just that they wanted something to remember him by. She paused. They asked about you, too. Where you were going to school, what you were studying. I didn't like it. You didn't tell them anything, right? Of course not. I'm not stupid, she sighed. It just bothered me. Why now? What changed? I didn't have an answer for her. I packed up my dorm room in May. Everything fit in the back of a borrowed pickup truck. The paintings came down last. I wrapped each one in newspaper, careful with the frames. I was carrying the last one down the stairs when my phone rang. I shifted the painting to one hand and dug my phone out with the other. My foot caught the edge of a step. The painting hit the landing before I did. The frame splintered. Shit! I crouched down and picked through the pieces. The canvas was fine, just some scratches. I pulled it free from the broken frame, and something fell out. A small piece of paper, yellowed and folded. It had been tucked behind the canvas, invisible until now. I unfolded it. My father's handwriting. Honey, my death likely brought this letter to your hands. I should have burned these paintings years ago. My hands shook every time I reached for the lighter. These canvases are proof of my past. I kept them to remind myself why I had to leave that place. I ran from the church because the alternative was losing my soul. Their beliefs and their actions were rot. I refused to raise a family in that shadow. I refused to let their influence touch our lives. If they ever come looking for you, you must run. Do not seek answers. Do not try to understand the nature of their hunger. Just go. Your safety and Charlie's life are the only things that matter now. My phone was still on the ground where I'd dropped it. I picked it up and called my mom back. Mom, I said, tell me about Dad's family again, the ones who came to the house. What? Why? Just tell me. They were strange. The woman did most of the talking. She had this accent, a really thick southern one. She kept smiling, but it didn't reach her eyes. The man just stood there and stared at me. What did they look like? Old, 50, 60 maybe. Dressed like they were going to church. Very modest. Very religious looking, I guess. I looked down at the letter in my hand. Charlie, what's going on? I don't know yet, I said. but I'm going to find out. I found a forum where people researched obscure religious movements. I posted a picture of one of the paintings and said I was looking for information about my father's childhood. 3 days later, someone sent me an image. No message, just an attachment. A photograph of a handwritten list. Names in 2 columns, maybe 30 or 40 total. Some had lines drawn through them. My father's name was 3rd from the top, crossed off. I searched the marked out names, found 17 matches. All of them had been born in the same cluster of small towns. All of them had left and started new lives somewhere else. Then they vanished or died under suspicious circumstances. Sometimes 20 years after they'd gone, sometimes 30. A sick feeling settled in my stomach. Maybe it hadn't been an accident. A letter arrived 2 weeks later. My name and my apartment address written in neat, careful script. The postmark was from a town I didn't recognize somewhere in the south. I opened it standing in my kitchen. Dear Charlie, your mother probably mentioned we stopped by to see her recently. We should have reached out sooner. We know it's been years since your father passed, and we're sorry we weren't there for you both during that time. We've been thinking about your dad a lot lately. He was family, even if we didn't always see eye to eye when he was younger. We'd love to share some stories about him with you, if you're interested. We have some old photographs we thought you might like to see. We'll be passing through your area next month for a church retreat. If you'd like to meet for dinner, we'd enjoy getting to know you. No pressure at all. We understand if the timing doesn't work. God bless, Thomas and Sarah. There was a phone number at the bottom. I didn't call the number. I sat on my apartment floor with the letter in my hands. They knew where I lived. They knew where my mother lived, and they had a list with my father's name crossed off. I packed a bag. I told my mom I was taking a road trip, seeing the country before job hunting started. She thought it was a good idea, said I'd earned a break. I didn't tell her where I was going. Didn't tell her about the letter or the list or why I was really leaving. The drive took 2 days. I could have done it in 1 if I'd pushed, but I didn't want to arrive exhausted. The landscape changed as I drove south. Flat farmland gave way to rolling hills, then thick forests that pressed close to the highway. Small towns appeared and disappeared, each one looking more tired than the last. I stopped for the night at a motel off the interstate. Sleep didn't come easy. The next morning, I drove the last 100 miles. State highways, then country roads, then roads that barely had names. The trees got thicker, houses became sparse, set back from the road behind long gravel driveways. I passed a hand-painted sign, "Welcome to God's Country." 20 minutes later, I found the town. A gas station, a post office, a Dollar General, and a diner that looked like it had been there since the 1950s. Everything else was houses and churches. Lots of churches. I drove through slowly. People on the sidewalk stopped and watched my car pass. Strangers probably didn't come through here often. The motel was on the edge of town. A single-story, L-shaped building with maybe a dozen rooms. The sign out front said, Travelot Motel, but the paint was peeling and half the letters were burned out. I sat in the car for a minute. If these people were as connected as I thought, they'd hear about a stranger in town. Probably already had. I'd register under my mother's maiden name, pay cash, no paper trail. I checked in, then took the key and went to find my room. Thin carpet, floral bedspread that didn't match the curtains, a TV bolted to the dresser. The bathroom was small but clean. I dropped my bag on the bed and sat down. I was here. Now what? I decided to get food first. Figure things out on a full stomach. The diner was easy to find, right on the main road. Half a dozen pickup trucks in the parking lot. I went inside. The conversations dropped when I walked in. People looked up, then went back to their meals. I sat at the counter. A waitress came over, an older woman with gray hair pulled back in a bun. Her name tag said Linda. "What can I get you, honey?" "Coffee and a burger? Whatever's good." "Everything's good here," she smiled. "You just get into town?" "Yeah, staying at the motel for a few days." "Visiting family?" "Something like that," I said. She nodded and went to put in my order. I sipped my coffee and looked around. The walls were covered in old photographs, the town in different eras. My burger came. I ate it slowly, listening to the surrounding conversations. Mostly talk about work, weather, whose kid was doing what, normal small-town stuff. But there was an undercurrent I couldn't quite place. The way people's eyes would flicker toward me, then away. The way conversations seemed to pause when I shifted in my seat. I paid my bill in cash and left. Drove around for a while, getting my bearings. Eventually found the church about 3 miles outside town. Set back from the road behind a chain-link fence, just like in my father's paintings. Small, square, black-painted wood. A gravel parking lot with weeds growing through the cracks. A hand-painted sign read, "Church of the Narrow Gate. Service Sunday 10 and 6. I didn't stop, just drove past, slow enough to take it in. I headed back to the motel. I woke up before the alarm, showered in the tiny bathroom, and put on the closest thing I had to church clothes. Dark jeans, button-down shirt. I looked at myself in the mirror. I looked like my father. Same jaw, same eyes, same way of standing with my shoulders slightly hunched. If anyone there remembered him, they'd recognize me. If someone did recognize my face, I could claim distant relation. Say I was looking into family history. Give myself room to back out if things felt wrong. It wasn't much of a plan, but it was something. I drove to the church at 9:30. Service started at 10. The parking lot had maybe a dozen cars in it, all older models, all clean despite the dirt roads. I parked at the edge and sat there for a minute, hands on the wheel. This was stupid. I should turn around, drive home, forget all about it. The front door was propped open. I could hear singing inside, voices raised in a hymn I didn't recognize. I walked up the 3 concrete steps and went in. The interior was plain. Wooden pews, maybe 15 rows. A simple pulpit at the front. No stained glass, no decorations, except for a large wooden cross on the wall behind the pulpit. Maybe 20 people scattered through the pews. Families, mostly, a few older couples. Everyone dressed modestly. I was underdressed. A few heads turned as I walked in. An older man near the back gestured to the empty space beside him. I nodded and sat down. The singing continued. I didn't know the words, so I just stood there while everyone around me sang. The hymn ended, and everyone took a seat. A man at the front, middle-aged with thinning hair and a kind face, stepped up to the pulpit. "Let us pray." Everyone bowed their heads. I did the same. The prayer was long. Standard stuff about grace and mercy and walking in the light. Nothing that raised any flags. When it ended, the preacher launched into a sermon about the book of Revelation, the end times, the tribulation, how the faithful would be saved and the wicked would face judgment. Halfway through, people started speaking in tongues. Just a few at first, scattered through the congregation. Nonsense syllables that rose and fell in rhythm with the preacher's words. Then more joined in. Within a minute, maybe half the room was doing it. I'd seen speaking in tongues before. It usually lasted a minute or two, then people would quiet down. This didn't stop. It built, got louder. The voices started to synchronize, falling into the same rhythm, the same cadence. It stopped sounding like random utterances and started sounding like a chant. The preacher kept talking, his voice rising to be heard over the congregation. But he wasn't trying to quiet them. He was encouraging it. His words shifted. His English dissolved into a guttural thrum. He wailed in a dialect of alien consonants and sibilant hisses. The sound dropped into a register that felt like a physical weight pressing against my rib cage. This was a predatory cadence. It echoed the damp, dark earth hidden beneath the floorboards. The air in the church felt thick. My head started to ache, a dull pressure behind my eyes. The woman in front of me was shaking, her hands raised, her head thrown back. Her posture stiffened, her spine locking against the wood. A sequence of rapid glottal clicks began to pour from her throat. These were sharp, almost percussive sounds. They were the noise of dry husks grinding together in a wind, or pebbles sliding down a mountain. The rest of the congregation joined in a unified, dissonant wall of sound. Their voices hit a low, vibrating frequency that rattled the marrow in my bones. I wanted to leave, but getting up and walking out would draw attention, so I stayed in my seat and tried to breathe through it. The chanting reached a peak, then suddenly stopped. Complete silence. The preacher lowered his head, placed both hands on the pulpit. When he looked up, he was smiling. "The Spirit is with us today, brothers and sisters. Let us give thanks." Everyone murmured agreement. The woman in front of me bowed her head, calm now. The preacher stepped down from the pulpit. The service seemed to be ending. People started to talk quietly among themselves. Behind the pulpit, a door at the back of the church opened. A man stepped through. He wore a white suit, immaculate, spotless. He also wore a pale mask that covered his entire face. No features, just plain white with 2 holes for eyes. The congregation went quiet again. The silence changed into something reverent, expectant. The man in the mask walked slowly to the pulpit. His gaze swept across the pews, row by row. When his eyes passed over me, I felt a weight, like something pressing against my skull. "Brothers and sisters," he said. His voice was deep, southern accent thick and smooth. "We gather here in the shadow of the Almighty. We stand at the edge of eternity. The great work continues, and we are blessed to be part of it." He raised one hand. "Let us give thanks for what has been provided. Let us prepare for what is to come." The congregation responded in unison. It wasn't exactly words, more like a low hum that vibrated through the building. I felt it in my chest, in my teeth. The man in the mask began to speak. It wasn't English or tongues, something stranger. The sounds were incomprehensible, syllables that didn't fit together, rhythms that made my head pound harder. Images flashed in my mind. A pale mass shifted in the darkness. This shape was vast and wet and ancient. I felt a heavy undulation in the deep. A slick muscle began rising toward the surface of my thoughts. This presence radiated a cold, absolute hunger. I closed my eyes, tried to block it out, but closing my eyes made it worse. The vision was clearer in the dark. The chanting ended abruptly, and I opened my eyes. The man in the mask was looking directly at me. For several seconds, neither of us moved. Then he lowered his hand and stepped back from the pulpit. He turned and walked through the door behind him. It closed with a soft click. The congregation started moving again. People stood, gathered their things, headed for the exits, like nothing unusual had happened. The man beside me stood and offered his hand.
"Welcome. I don't think we've met."
I shook his hand. "Charlie, just visiting." He nodded slowly.
"You look familiar. You got family around here?"
"Distant relatives, I think. I'm trying to track down some family history. Thought I'd start by visiting local churches."
"Well, you came to the right place. Lots of old families around here."
He smiled.
"I'm Tom. You should come back for evening service, 6 o'clock. More informal. Good chance to meet people. Ask around about your folks."
I'll think about it."
"You do that."
Tom patted my shoulder and walked away. I stood there for another minute, waiting for my head to clear. The pressure was fading, but slowly. The vision was reluctant to let go. I walked out into the parking lot, and the sun felt like it was too bright. I squinted against it and got in my car, hands shaking. I gripped the steering wheel until they steadied. I'd seen something, or felt something. I didn't know which. But it had been real. There was something in that church. Something that responded when they called to it. And they all seemed to act like this was normal. I drove back to the motel and sat on the bed, staring at the wall. Evening service was at 6. I had a few hours. I wasn't going back for evening service. I'd seen enough. Now I needed to see what they didn't want visitors to see. I needed to come back at night. I spent the afternoon at the diner. Coffee and pie I didn't touch. Linda refilled my cup. A few locals nodded at me. They'd probably seen me at the morning service. By the time I got back to the motel, it was almost dark. I sat in my room and waited, watched the clock tick past 6, past 7, past 8. Evening service would be over by now. I changed into dark clothes. Jeans, black t-shirt, hoodie. Put my phone in my pocket, made sure it was on silent. The drive to the church only took 10 minutes. I killed my headlights a quarter-mile out and coasted the rest of the way, parking on the shoulder behind a stand of trees. The church sat dark against the night sky. No cars in the parking lot, no lights in the windows. I watched for 5 minutes. Nothing moved. I circled around the building. The back had a small window, the kind that tilted out for ventilation. It was latched, but the latch looked old. I found a rock in the gravel and used it to tap at the frame until the wood splintered enough for me to work the latch free. The window swung open. I pulled myself up and through, landing hard on the floor inside. I was in a storage room. Shelves lined the walls, stacked with hymnals and boxes of candles. A door on the far side led into the main sanctuary. I pulled out my phone and turned on the flashlight. The sanctuary looked different at night. The cross on the wall behind the pulpit seemed larger somehow. I walked down the center aisle. The door behind the pulpit, that's where the man in the mask had come from, I walked up the steps to the platform and tried the handle. Unlocked. Behind it, a dim hallway. My phone's flashlight seemed muted, as though the darkness was pressing back against it. I could see another door at the far end, but nothing else. The hallway smelled like damp earth. The door at the end was unlocked as well and opened to a stairwell. Concrete steps leading down into darkness. The smell was stronger here. I covered my nose with my sleeve and started down. The stairs went deeper than they should have. One flight, then another, then another. The temperature dropped. The walls changed from concrete to rough stone. Water seeped through the cracks, making everything slick. At the bottom, a tunnel, carved through rock, shored up in places with old timber beams, looking like an old-time gold mine. Electric lights hung from the ceiling every 20 feet or so, bare bulbs that cast weak yellow light. Someone had been down here recently. The lights were on. The tunnel opened into a chamber. It was large, maybe the size of a gymnasium. The ceiling was high and disappeared into shadow. The floor sloped gently down toward the center, where the room opened into a vast pit. Around the pit, symbols had been carved into the stone, geometric patterns I couldn't quite understand. My eyes kept sliding off them. And at the edge of the pit, there were people. I quickly ducked behind a support timber. I counted maybe a dozen figures in white robes standing in a circle at the edge. They were chanting, the same inhuman noise I'd heard during the service. It resonated through the chamber, through my bones. In the center of the circle stood the man in the white suit and pale mask. Kneeling in front of him, hands bound, was a young woman in white shorts and a t-shirt. She was blindfolded. She was crying, trying to pull away from the hands holding her, but the people in robes didn't let go. The man in the mask raised his arms. The chanting grew louder. Something in the pit answered, rising slowly. A pale shape in the darkness, glistening, wet. My eyes tried to follow the edges of it, find where one part ended and another began, but the edges kept moving, reorganizing. A surface that might have been skin split open and folded back on itself. Something that looked like a milky and unfocused eye rolled to the surface before sinking back down into the mass. A cluster of what might have been tentacles emerged from a different section, flexing and curling before they were absorbed back into the whole. It was massive. What I could see peeking over the edge was just a fraction of it. The rest extended down into the pit, into depths I couldn't comprehend. Pain spiked behind my eyes. I pressed my palms against my temples. The pressure didn't help. My vision blurred at the edges. I blinked hard. The thing was still there, still rising. My teeth ached. My jaw was clenched so tight I thought something might crack. I tried to relax the muscles but couldn't. A high-pitched ringing started in my ears. Under it, a sound like static, or wet things moving against each other. I started shaking. I felt like I was outside my body looking in. They pulled the blindfold off the woman. She saw the abomination and began screaming, snapping me back to awareness. The robed figures lifted her and carried her to the edge of the pit. She fought, but there were far too many of them. They held her over the edge, suspended above the thing below, then threw her down. The thing began to descend back into the pit, taking her with it. Her screams faded as it pulled her down into the darkness, down until I couldn't hear her scream anymore. The robed figures lowered their heads. The man in the mask stepped back from the edge, and every head turned toward me. I must have made a sound, Or maybe they'd known I was there the whole time. The robed figures moved calmly and deliberately toward me. I staggered backward, away from the outcropping. My legs felt like they weren't working right. I tried to run, but my body wasn't responding. Static ran through my nerves. I made it a few steps before my legs gave out. Hands grabbed me, pulled me upright. I didn't fight. What was the point? They dragged me back toward the pit. I thought they were going to throw me in, feed me to that thing waiting below. But they didn't. They pulled me past the pit, toward another tunnel I hadn't noticed, deeper into the earth. The man in the mask walked alongside. He didn't say anything, just watched as they carried me away. The last thing I remember before the darkness took me was a white rag, reeking faintly of something chemical covering my mouth. Then, nothing. Whatever they had used to drug me was wearing off, but my mind still felt thick. My awareness slowly floated up out of the pit of black velvet it had been stewing in. I was hanging by my arms from overhead. I looked up. Thick chains bound my wrists and dug into my skin. A gag filled my mouth that tasted faintly of rubber. I tried to swallow, but couldn't. A single naked light bulb hung above me, casting deep shadows around the rest of the room. I had completely fucked up. I knew what rooms like this were used for. I knew what was coming. The metal door creaked open, and the man with the pale mask and the crisp white suit from the ceremony walked in. He cocked his head to the side and smiled a joyless smile. "I'm gonna break you, boy, and there's nothing you can do about it." It almost sounded ridiculous in his deep southern accent, like I was being threatened by Colonel Sanders. But there was absolutely nothing funny about the quiet malice in his voice. He circled around me, dragging something long and thin that I couldn't quite make out across the bare floor. The anticipation made my guts feel cold and twisted. I heard the first strike whip through the air before it landed. Across my shoulders, a line of burning pain. I jerked and twisted against the chains as my back exploded into fire. A cane. A bamboo cane. Shit. "You came here thinking you'd be the one, didn't you?" He kept circling. "The one to expose us. The one to save everyone." His voice seemed to jump around, sometimes close to my ear, sometimes behind me. Another strike, lower this time. I strained against the chains biting into my flesh. "You're what, 21? 22? You've been alive long enough that you think you understand how the world works? You have no fucking clue." 3 vicious strikes, one right after the other. My screams were muffled by the thick gag. I tried to focus, but between the pain and the drugs, my mind felt soft. "You were careful, or at least you thought you were. Thought you'd covered your tracks." His voice stayed level, almost bored. "You thought you were smarter than the people who've been doing this for 30 fucking years." He stopped, and I heard him take a deep breath. "The arrogance of youth. You can't help it." The end of the cane tapped against my skull. Once, twice. "You still think you're special. Nobody's coming for you, and nobody knows where you are." He was in front of me now, crouching down. Through the pain and the tears, the mask was just a blur of white. "And in a week, nobody will remember they should be looking." He stood, started circling again. "You'll understand eventually, if there's enough of you left to understand anything." Time stopped meaning much after a while. They took my clothes and gave me an oversized pair of joggers and a t-shirt to wear. They'd moved me from the room within the chains to a cell. Brick walls, no windows, a metal door with a slot for food, then back to the room with the chains. The cult leader would come. The cane would come out. I'd scream until my voice gave out, then scream some more. Sometimes it was the cult leader. Sometimes it was others. Men in robes who didn't speak, just did what they were told. They gave me water and enough food to keep me alive, but that was it. The horror wasn't in the pain, but in the mechanical, tireless way they went about their work. They moved with the efficiency of a machine designed to harvest rather than to punish. I lost track of how many times they dragged me back to that room. The days bled together, but I'm sure it had been at least a week or more. One night, or maybe it was day, the lock clicked quietly. I braced myself for what was to come, but instead, the door eased open a few inches, and I caught a flash of a light blue eye and a face that looked familiar. Then footsteps faded down the corridor. I stared at it a while. This had to be a trick. A test. They were watching to see if I'd try to run so they could punish me worse. But I was already broken. What more could they do? I pulled myself to my feet using the wall. Every movement sent fire through my back. I stepped into the hallway. The tunnel branched. I took the path that sloped upward. Figured up was good. Up meant surface. Up meant out. I heard two voices ahead. One of them was the cult leader. I'd know that smooth southern drawl anywhere. The other voice was unfamiliar, pleading. I followed the sound. The tunnel opened into the chamber with the pit, the same place I'd watched them feed the woman to that thing. Only two people this time, just the man in the white suit standing at the edge of the pit, and another man on his knees in front of him. The kneeling man was older, maybe 50, with my father's eyes, my father's face. I knew it without being told. This was the person who'd sent me the list. This was family. The cult leader had a gun. He was talking, his voice calm and measured, explaining something to the man on the ground. I couldn't make out the words. Then he raised the gun and fired. The sound echoed through the chamber. My distant relative fell forward, clutching his chest. I ran at him, my legs barely working. I stumbled once, caught myself, kept going. The cult leader heard me at the last second, started to turn. I tackled him with all the strength I could manage. My shoulder drove into his ribs, and he went over the edge. For a split second, I thought I was going down with him. My momentum carried me forward, my feet skidding on the damp cavern floor. Then I caught my balance before I went over too. He fell, the pale mask coming loose and drifting away from his face. Just an old man. White hair, deep wrinkles, eyes wide with terror. His white suit bright against the darkness below. He didn't scream, or if he did, I couldn't hear it over the sound of the cyclopean shifting of weight within the gloom. A rhythmic, wet grinding of cartilage and bone rising to meet him. I staggered over to the man laying on the ground. He looked so much like my father it hurt. He was still breathing, shallow and wet-sounding breaths. Blood spread across his shirt. "Go," he whispered. His eyes found mine. Same shape as my father's, but lighter. "Go now." "I can't leave you." "You have to," he coughed. More blood at the corner of his mouth. "Tell people. Tell them what happens here." Sounds rose from the pit. Screams and wet, ripping noises. Then nothing. He fumbled at his pocket, pulling out keys, and pressed them into my palm.
My car. Blue Ford. Parking lot. Clothes, wallet, phone. Everything you came here with is in the trunk.
Come with me.
Can't.
His breathing was getting worse.
I'm sorry about your father, about all of it. I should have...
Another cough.
Should have done this years ago.
What's your name? He smiled, blood staining his teeth.
Daniel.
I'm Charlie.
I know.
His eyes started to close.
Run, Charlie.
I ran. Back through the tunnels. Up the stairs. I burst through the door behind the pulpit into the church sanctuary. Early morning light came through the windows. The front door was locked from the inside. I flipped the bolt and ran outside. The parking lot was empty except for a few cars. A blue Ford, 20 years old, rusted around the edges. I got my stuff out of the trunk and started driving. I didn't know where I was going at first, just away. But after an hour, I realized I was heading north, toward home, toward my mother. I needed to warn her. I had to tell her everything, but more importantly, to make sure she was safe. I drove for hours. I stopped once at a gas station and used the bathroom to wash the worst of the blood off. The clerk stared at me but didn't say anything. Once I was back on the road, I tried to call my mother 3 times. No answer. She was fine. She had to be fine. I crossed the state line. 2 more hours to home. My phone rang. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer. Hello? Is this Charlie? A man's voice, official sounding. My stomach dropped. Yes? This is Detective Garrett with the County Sheriff's Department. I'm calling about your mother, Sandra. There's been an incident at her residence. We need you to come to... What happened? Sir, I think it's better if we discuss this in person. Are you in the area? What happened to my mother? Silence on the other end. Then there was a fire. I'm very sorry. The rest of the conversation was white noise. I don't remember what he said or what I said back. I remember pulling over to the side of the highway, sitting there with my hands on the wheel, staring at nothing. Then I was driving again. I pulled onto my mother's street just after 9. The house was dark. The roof was gone. The walls were blackened shells. Yellow crime scene tape stretched across the front yard. A single patrol car sat at the curb, but no fire trucks, no ambulances. They'd already taken her away. I parked and got out, walked toward the house like I was in a dream. The patrol officer got out of his car when he saw me approaching the tape. Sir, this is an active investigation. That's my house, I said. My mother. Hold on. He pulled out his phone, made a call, spoke quietly for a minute, then hung up. Detective Garrett is on his way. Should be about 20 minutes. You want to wait in your car? I shook my head. The officer went back to his car but kept watching me. I sat down on the curb across the street. The smell of burned wood hung in the air, wet ash, chemicals from whatever the firefighter had used. A neighbor's porch light came on. Mrs. Patterson from 2 doors down. She came out in her bathrobe, saw me, and started crying before she even made it across her yard. She sat next to me on the curb, said she'd seen my mother just yesterday morning. They'd talked about the garden. Then last night, around 7, she'd smelled smoke. Called 911. By the time the trucks got there, the whole house was engulfed. Detective Garrett arrived 15 minutes later, got out of an unmarked sedan, walked over to where I was sitting. Structure fire, arson investigator, my mother's body, I'm so sorry for your loss. I asked when it happened. He checked his notes. Yesterday evening. They'd already won. Before I even pushed their leader into the pit, they'd already taken what mattered. I sat there and stared at the ruins of the house where I'd grown up. Nothing was left. The detective asked if I knew of anyone who would want to hurt my mother. Any threats, any unusual contact in recent weeks? What could I say? That a cult in the middle of nowhere fed people to a monster underground, and they killed my mother to tie up loose ends? He'd think I was crazy, or in shock, or both. So I said no. Said I couldn't think of anyone. Said my mother was a good person who didn't have enemies. He gave me his card, told me to call if I remembered anything. Said they'd be in touch. I sat on the curb until the police left, too. Until it was just me and the burned house. My father had run from that church to protect his family. He'd spent 30 years keeping his distance, never looking back, never mentioning it. I'd undone all of it in a few weeks because I found a letter and thought I deserved answers. And my mother had paid the price.
Well, damn. The bad guys win again. And here I am, still with no clue as to what was in that pit. I'm no religious scholar, but I can't think of any text that mentions that thing. Ugh. If you enjoyed this story, please check out more from this author in the links below. Please also leave us a like and a comment. Whatever you do, make sure you have an ironclad escape plan. And don't fall asleep.